I was watching this guy called Steve Bartlett. He made some company called Social Chain, which sold for 200 million euros or something. He also has a podcast called Diary of a CEO. Anyway, I saw his podcast and he's like, how I make 1.2 million from this podcast. He was saying these things.
Shit. Man, I don't know what it is. Like, I think once you figure it out, you can't stop making money, I think. 1.2 million from... Okay, I got to listen. Diary of a...
CEO. So he asked his main dude, draw me up a shopping list of all the gear I need to make a good podcast with video, not just audio. So the guy, he says it in this podcast, you'll hear it. He says he goes off and comes down with a $4,000 bill. Then he tells him like, look, I want it to be awesome. How much do I need to really make it awesome? Tell me awesome. So he goes off and comes back with a $40,000 bill.
Oh, okay.
And of course, then he speaks relatively well, and then he edits the mother-loving shit out of it.
Who he's paying, like, he has the best editor. Obviously, he has the best editor in Europe, in the continent, right?
Yeah. And so he's got like a good editing people. He does all this stuff. So that's what I'm saying. So rich begets rich. So if you strike rich with something, then you're like, what is this $40,000? Give me the best of the shit. And then you make the best, give it to somebody to edit it. And that bugger will do an awesome job at it. And then...
Right. You have like a social media manager, right? You have like a person, SEO, this one who will like really pump the heck out of it and know how to get it to the top.
People like us who have not created any content on YouTube, it's a little bit challenging to come up.
So let me give you a picture of the other end of the spectrum, which is us, right? I can't make this shit up, okay? I can't make it up. This kind of thing happens. So at the other end of the spectrum is I overpaid the last urgent care bill by a few dollars, and this Anthem sent me a check that's $3.85. Okay, $3.85. I'm like, shit, I'm not going to let go of this. I've got to go and cash this check for $3.85. Okay. So no, that doesn't end there. So it's been sitting on my desk for a while. And I'm like, I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to scan this thing and I got to cash this check. And I always keep my office door locked because otherwise the kid is going to come in and mess things up. So one morning it was open and he came inside, and that I came, and this check has been sitting on my desk for like a few weeks now.
Yeah.
It's always in front of me, so I can't miss it, right? So I come and sit down for work after dropping him to school, and then I'm like, where the hell did the check go? Right? I'm like, I want my $3 check. I mean, and then I start looking around for it, and I couldn't find it. And then it's like, you know what? Whatever, it's $3. It's my fault that I procrastinated. My kid got to it first. And then that evening, I changed the diaper, and I opened up the diaper pail to put his dirty diaper, poopy diaper in, and I'm like, I see the check in his diaper pail. This guy, he's opened up his diaper pail and he shoved it in there. Oh my god! Then what the hell? I fished it out of there. I was really happy. I have a second chance at my $3, and I brought it back to my desk.
That's funny.
Recently, Vikram, your older kiddo, he started his first grade, right?
Yeah, I can't believe it's already been like 6 years. But here he is.
And I have to imagine this is some sort of a big milestone, not only for him, but all of you, right? The whole family, it's sort of a thing. Because I would imagine that, graduating from kindergarten to first, it's sort of a... people around start looking at him as no longer a toddler. I mean, he's like a little boy now who is out there in the world. And
yeah, he has a grade assigned to him, like first grade. That's the beginning of, say, his formal education in a way, right? All the way through many grades that he's going to go through, and then college and undergrad, university. I don't know how far he's going to take it, but there seems to be a clearly charted territory or line of progress from this point on, which is why I believe it's a big milestone.
Apart from your kid graduating to first grade, even Sam, your wife, also started teaching in her school. She was previously in a tech job, and now she's a teacher. So this is also a big change. So what are you guys thinking? What's going on in your head?
So, although I say first grade, it really is a Montessori school. So, in a Montessori school, they don't really have grades. It's a mixed age group of children. And so, he is in actually the elementary program. So, the elementary program has kids from ages 6 through 12. So, it's a mixed age group. Still, in public education standards, he is in first grade. A lot of people that my child is friends with, for example, transition out of Montessori schooling and they join public schooling around this age because they can go to first grade in their local elementary school. And this seems to be the decision by a lot of parents because, for one reason, private Montessori education is expensive. And the other reason is that a lot of these schools have a great school rating. So parents try to buy homes in good school districts that have a good, great school rating. So this is actually a driving factor in where a lot of people live and where they buy homes and for how much money they buy homes. And because these great schools rating affect home prices so much in the US, they tend to drive up the home prices because of this good schooling district available
Mm-hmm.
there,
Yeah.
because obviously supply goes down and demand goes up, so it drives the
Right.
prices up. And a lot of parents put a lot of effort in their careers because they need to have the income to keep up with these high mortgage levels so that they can go to this good school, right?
Yeah.
And I have actually heard parents who have told me before that this elementary school acts as a feeder to, say, Harvard University, which to me is something I cannot process in my head entirely because
They think it's an upside, but you sort of think it's some sort of a downside, in fact.
I'm not sure what to think of it. The reason is I don't see a direct connection between elementary and Harvard University. I don't. But on
Yeah.
that being said, I gave it some thought yesterday and I was thinking how this link is established and why parents think that this is so important to have a good school district rating. And it occurred to me that children who go to elementary schools in a good school district have a better chance of getting into middle school with also a good grade schools rating, which is apparently supposed to be better. We'll come to that entirely different topic because I don't know what exactly the grade school rating means and how indicative it is of a good education. That's a different talking point for sure. But then I figured if a child goes to a good middle school, the child will then progress into a good high school,
Right.
which eventually leads into a good university admission because there's also this thing called reputation that universities look at. If this child is from a reputed high school, colleges tend to be more accepting of these students, right?
Correct.
So
correct.
this is
Yeah.
where I think the pressure to join a good university has built up over a long time and puts a lot of pressure on children as they progress through the schooling system.
Yeah.
So this is what has been on my mind about education, especially since my older one has started first grade.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I can imagine, right? I mean, it's not only a pressure. So it's like a loop. The parents, they move to a different neighborhood so that their children can go to a better school, and in the process, they're putting pressure on themselves to make more money or keep up the amount they're earning, and pay all this heavy mortgage and all that. So they are increasing the stress on themselves, and indirectly they are putting stress on the children because the pressure to perform is higher. So the parents at the back of the mind, even though they're not thinking about this voluntarily, but there has to be a notion at the back of the mind of the parent that, look, we're making this sacrifice, we're taking up all of this extra burden in order to put this kid in a better school, and there is a pressure on the kid to perform. And perform essentially means get good grades, right?
Yeah, it is academically oriented for sure. Good grades, good test scores because of standardized testing. The kids in these schools are expected to generate good test scores to keep the good rating of their school up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as they go to colleges, a lot of these schools also look at extracurricular activities. So, in addition to all this academic pressures,
Mm-hmm.
kids are forced to pursue instrument playing or sport, or sometimes all of the above.
They got to be good at chess. They got to be good at, I don't know, taekwondo or some other martial art.
Exactly. So the building up a college resume is what education is tending to become. And that is a lot of pressure for a child to perform well in everything and still do well in academics. Uh, I feel like there is a lost childhood in this whole process of taking competitive exams and competing for something that is not even within the grasp of the child yet. I think college is something that happens much later in an education, and everything is geared towards meeting that goal.
Hmm. It's pretty unfortunate in some ways because, we do live in a hyper competitive world, right? Especially if you take a place like California, right? If you're in one of these tech hubs like Bay Area or San Diego, as a young parent, right? My kid turned 2.5 year old a few months ago, and we started him off in a preschool. And when that was happening, I remember I was pretty stressed. It was my wife who did all the work of researching schools and talking to teachers and picking a good one. But I couldn't help but sit there and be stressed through all of this, right? Because I kind of felt that, man, I'm responsible for this little person, and the decisions I make now could hurt or help him, many years in the future. When I think about it from that point of view, I can see how I overcompensate. I'm like, hey, I don't want to leave any stone unturned. I want to make sure my kid has all the necessary skills so that he can make a good living and have a comfortable life in the future. And so, in the process of thinking like that, before you know it, I have put my kid into a very rigorous school which has no focus on, say, sports. It is very academically focused. And then I have him enrolled in 5 after school programs. And the poor kid is stressed starting at 6 years old. When he's like in the first grade itself, he's like, he's doing way more than he should be. And, and all this because of a certain fear that I, as a parent, have. That I don't want him to fall short. It's a sort of a difficult position to be in, I feel.
That's an exactly accurate thing to say, because even parents who do put their child into competitive schools, competitive sport, and any activity that builds up a college resume are doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They want their child to do well. They want their children to have the best of opportunity, right? To get into the best of universities, to get into the best of colleges, and to eventually have the shot at the best of jobs and a comfortable life. So it is coming from a good place, that's for sure. At some point, we have to decide what is important as a parent for ourselves, and what is important for the child, and what it is that you exactly want out of the process. And by this, I mean, what is your ultimate goal for your child? Do you want your child to become the world's most top surgeon? Or do you want your child to become Chief Justice of the United States
Mm-hmm.
or a CEO of a company? What is it that you want? The other way of looking at it is, do you want your child to just have a sense of happiness, be happy with what they do? It doesn't matter what they pursue, their decisions are their own. They may choose other professions, art, music, which are traditionally not associated with high pay, although some musicians and artists do reach high levels of perfection in their art. It could be that your child is the one who becomes that artist or that musician. But sometimes, as a parent, it is hard to acknowledge the fact that your child does not want to do something that is obviously a high paying career that you perceive would be easier for the child to do in order to have a comfortable life.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's the hard choice.
I see the fallacy in the way I am thinking, right? I mean that, hey, I don't want to leave any stone unturned, and I want to make sure my child has all the opportunities available to him, and I want to maximize his opportunities for his future. I see the fallacy with that point of thinking, because if I keep thinking about his future right from when he is like 2.5 years old, then at the end of it, I will end up with a teenager. Probably he's stressed out, he suffers from anxiety and depression. He wouldn't have enjoyed his childhood. And at the end of it, my sole focus would be to make sure that he can earn enough money. So that's what it doesn't matter if it's a doctor or whatever it is, but at the root of it, I want to make sure he can earn enough money, right? So if that's my sole focus, then I'm not thinking about raising a compassionate and responsible adult. And instead of it, I mean, I've given him all these skills to earn money, but if you look at his personality, probably he's going to be a complete asshole, really. So I got to keep that in mind as I raise him. That it not only his, I mean, it's not just his future that is at stake here. Right? It's more about, am I raising an adult who is like responsible and compassionate generally, who knows the world around him, who's sort of kind and things like that.
So, what you are saying is you are more focused on creating a balanced citizen of the world who is compassionate, kind to others, loves doing the kind of work that he wants to pursue. It could be anything, but he has to love working. I think that's an important part of everybody's life. You have to have a profession, you have to enjoy doing it. And part of the success comes from the fact that you like what you do. Because if you don't like what you do, there is no way you're going to be successful at it. You have to like what you do, right?
Yeah.
As a parent, it is useful to encourage a child to seek out what it is that they actually enjoy.
Yeah.
That is one perspective on parenting. I'm not saying one is correct over the other. But here, let me ask you this. What do you think parents should do apart from schooling to raise a compassionate and well rounded individual?
Yeah. When I see my friends who have slightly older kids, right? And I see their outlook on what the role of a school should be. And when I sit down and think about what I think the role of a school should be, my default tendency is that I expect the school to do too much. I think, hey, I'm paying so much money for the school, and I'm very quick to be angry at them for not giving this kid so much outside time, right? And the kid is getting only an hour of playtime in a day. I'm quick to be angry at them. This kind of an outlook that I'm experiencing is common among parents. I can argue that we expect a little too much out of our schools. The kid is in school from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And after that, we put him in some sort of a after school program, say chess, swimming, whatever it is. And it's easy to think that, hey, if I put my kid in these right places, and that's my job is done. Right? I mean, it's easy
Right.
to think that way, that you've done your job as a parent. When I look at our parents, when I look at my parents, I spent a ton of time at your place. I've observed your parents a lot. And I remember just watching your dad, right? Just watching your dad was very influential. I mean, it did change my habits as a teenager. If, for example, your dad was perpetually curious, he worked in human resources, I remember at one point in time, but he would read a book on Java programming, right? He would learn new stuff all the time.
Yeah, he was a completely self taught computer guy.
Exactly. He was a completely self-taught coder. And then he would, in his 50s, he decides that, hey, I'm going to pick up a violin and learn a new instrument. So, we don't have to do anything for the kid or with the kid, right? I mean, just doing the right things at home. So when the kid is at home, I tell myself, look, don't be on the phone. When the kid is around you, either play with him or do your own things. Like, be a positive influence on them. And then because he's watching you, or he or she is, your kid is watching you all the time, and that is one way of teaching them how to grow up.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Because with the influx of social media, there's always work emails. Parents are constantly on devices. And when they do want to relax, many parents do watch TV in the presence of their child. They play video games. I've heard through the grapevine that some parents do play violent video games in front of their child, because I hear things that my son talks about to me. And like, how did you find that out? That's weird.
Yeah.
How do you know
So,
that?
okay, that guy's dad is playing Call of Duty all the time.
Yeah, seriously. And he's playing violent video games, and the friends talk to each other, and then I hear it through the grapevine, and I'm like, how do you know that? It's weird. So, like you say, instead of spending time in the hours that your child is awake, because children do need to sleep 10 to 12 hours, which is another problem. I think that children are not sleeping enough these days because of the influx of devices and things like that. While they are awake, like you say, it is very good if you can do what you do. Do you play an instrument? Play it in front of them.
Yeah.
They want to play too, give them a turn at playing it. Do you do woodworking? Give them a nail and a hammer. You'd be surprised that they don't really smash their finger in. You'd really be surprised. They do a very good job putting nails in wood, and my kids do this all the time, and they actually develop hand control. I think gardening is another great way of teaching compassion, because you have to care for a plant. It gives you food. You know where food comes from, right?
Right.
Not from the grocery store. You grow it, you eat it. There's a certain satisfaction to that. Taking care of pets, it teaches you compassion. So there are things that you can do and teach younger children how to become compassionate individuals that is entirely out of academics. And this is all an essential part of their childhood and their life. And not to mention doing chores. I make the kids fold their own laundry, because they have to put away their laundry. They have to keep their environment clean. Because when they grow up, they are going to have to do this. They are going to have to keep their own place clean. And this is something they have to be instilled from a very young age, regardless of their education. So, in my opinion, and I think this is what you are saying too, that there are other things one can do to make a well rounded individual in a child, apart from education and extracurricular activities, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Just being the person you want them to be.
That's a very good way to put it.
From this discussion, right, one of my takeaways is that, whatever I do for my kid, like these programs I put him into, or, whatever it is, I shouldn't keep thinking of it as I'm doing something for his future. If I put him in an after school program, I shouldn't keep thinking of things as opportunities for the future and planning for the future. A part of me should also keep thinking about what can I do to enrich his time right now, and not keep thinking of securing his future. We as parents, and being in this hyper competitive world, in some ways we've been trained to think this way. We've been trained to purposely keep planning for the future. I guess it's part of being human, I think, but it's like we overly do it, and are rarely, like, we ourselves don't live in the present, and we are training our kids and not letting them live in the present as well.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing. That's true, right? And I want to also mention one other thing, is that although a lot of education is, like you say, planned for the future, the college admission and success in a career, all this starts on basic building blocks. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people don't focus very much on early childhood education. They really don't. They think that from the age of 0 to 6, yeah, you're just in kindergarten, daycare, I don't know, watch TV and play with toys. But honestly, that portion of a child's life is full of change. Think about your child when he or she is born. They can't do anything for themselves. But by the age of 6, they are fully developed with full motor skills, with a complete understanding of language and grammar, able to negotiate social situations. They have friends, they get upset, they get angry, they feel happy, they have all these swaths of emotions.
Yeah.
And unlike any other species, humans build things from nothing. What I mean to say is, when a cow is born, it pretty much starts walking in a short span of time. And the cow's, mooing or whatever, a calf would do the same thing as a grown cow would, right? Their language does not evolve. They do what they do. But humans have a great sense of transformation from the age of 0 to 6. And in fact, psychologists have written about this period of a child's life and how it is so significant. Since we go to Montessori schools, and my wife is a Montessori teacher too, I've heard her discuss with me the planes of development. Basically, 0 to 6 is a plane of development.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 to 12 is another plane of development. 12 to 18 is another plane. And 18 to 24 is finally the adult plane, after which you're a mature adult. So now each plane can be subdivided into two smaller age groups. Like each 3 years makes a big difference, right? 0 to 3, you cannot really tell your child what to do. They really do not process what you're telling them. They have an inner guide they follow, and they do it out of their own need to do it. It's not like they know they're doing it, it's not intentional. They just do what their inner guide tells them. And so each phase of development feeds onto the next. So if you have a good 0 to 3 and a good 3 to 6, that sets up the child for a very good 6 to 12. And that will set up the child for a good 12 to 18. And now we are talking about colleges. So the whole thing is important. It's not like you can do whatever you want, but then suddenly you expect your child to get into these universities. I think education is a long process, and it starts actually very young. It's as young as even 2, I would argue.
That's a good point. I mean, that's a really, I think you laid it out pretty well. Because it's very easy to think that from 0 to 5, he's just a baby and all he needs is a nanny. You think that, he's not old enough to engage with him yet, but you're sort of losing valuable time if you're not engaging with your child and taking him outdoors.
Yeah, at that age, they need to explore. They are based on a lot of touch and sensory activities. So take them out, make them feel the flowers, smell the flowers, pick up rocks, observe the bugs, give them little things to do around the house. They love doing it. And I think that develops a wholesome child for the next phase of their life. So it's all important, is what I'm saying.
One of the things that really bothers me is that in present day education, right, what we are tending towards is essentially a template for raising a child. For example, your friends or acquaintances who move to a different neighborhood so that their children could go to a different public school, and you said that those schools are essentially feeder schools for Harvard. Okay, as a parent, you feel like being a good parent means raising your child according to this template, right? You're sort of putting your kid in a box right from first grade. You have already pre-decided these milestones that this kid has to hit. It just feels really sad.
You know where it comes from, in my opinion?
Mm-hmm.
You have one shot at doing this, and there is no feedback loop. Basically, you cannot tell from a year or two of education if it's going really well or little bit well. I think you can tell if it's going really badly, but you have no way of really gauging your own progress or your child's progress in a quantitative manner. And the other problem is that it's not like you can go to a brewery and sample beers, right? You can't
Yeah.
sample education forms. Like, do you want to do various schools of education? There's Waldorf, there's Montessori, there's public education, and each country has different styles. Like the US has project based learning, and a lot of Southeast Asian countries, India included, has by rote memorization. So there are all these different styles, and there is no way for us to try each one out to understand what this has to offer our child before we commit to it. So we have to go with the flow, and oftentimes seeing other people do something and working out for them gives you lesser chance of failure, and you therefore follow the template.
Yeah, you sort of, that's a good point. Yeah, you just see, hey, what has worked for people, and you just take the proven track. And before you know it, you have cities full of children who essentially have been raised to do the one singular task.
This is getting seriously dystopian. This is straight out of a George Orwell book. I'm sure this is in a George Orwell book.
Yeah, I mean, incredible, right? Okay.
But it's interesting that, education forms differ based on where we are in geographical locations, right? What do you think our experience was? We both studied in India and grew up in schools in the 90s. What do you think we went through, or what is your experience?
India during the 80s and 90s, it was a strange time. Present day India is very different from how it was when we were growing up in the 90s. But I don't have a very favorable opinion of our schooling experience. It didn't hurt us or help us. I kind of feel like it was sort of I'm being very harsh when I say this, but I kind of feel it was a lost decade, essentially. So we started first grade in 1991, and then we finished 10th grade in 2000, right? And I call it a sort of a lost decade because all education, starting from the first grade, the purpose was you would be taught some curriculum, right, which is established by the central government through the year. You'd be taught this curriculum through the year. And all that mattered was this test that you took at the end of the year and what marks or what grade you got on those tests. And this started at first grade, right? So at the end of the year, once you have taken your test, you're given a rank. And I think that's very brutal on the kids, because the only thing you're trained to do is for the next decade, you're going to have this number next to your name, and which is going to essentially tell people what you're worth. And your main job as a child is keep improving that number. Even for parents, right? I don't think parents ever questioned, hey, what's being taught in the school? Or, I mean, is your kid learning something useful? All that mattered was when you bring your report card back home at the end of the year, when your mom takes a look at it, if you don't have good marks, then you get a beating, saying, hey, you got to do better than this.
That happens quite often. Yes.
Yeah, you really haven't appreciated anything that you've learned. You've learned 10 years of incredible amount of Indian rich history, the basics of sciences, physics, chemistry, and math, and you have no appreciation for any of this. One of my subjects that bothered me the most was English. Oh my God. I mean, how could somebody, screw up English education so much, right? I remember when we were in 10th grade, English had two parts. It had poetry and literature. We had this book called Pageant of Poems. And for the literature, we had Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. Man, that used to stress me out so much, because the idea was not to appreciate poetry, or it was not to learn how Shakespeare wrote these plays, but it was more about you got to prepare for these convoluted questions that will be asked in the exam, and give them the right answer so that you get the max mark. So it was not about learning Shakespeare's or poetry. It was all about expecting some convoluted question in the exam and making sure you prepare to answer those convoluted questions. So it was very stressful. I mean, I hated English actually at the end of it. And it's really unfortunate. I mean, writers and stuff are not made this way. I mean, like, my wife has a few friends who are writers. And I think they all are mostly self-learned, I would imagine, because that kind of interest doesn't come out of education.
I would argue that our education system that we went through as children is geared towards making you good at taking exams. They teach you to take exams, not really teach you the subject matter at hand. And I have the same experience with Hindi, and we joked about it in the last episode. I was also terrified of Hindi, which is another language problem. It's funny, we both have language problems. And it doesn't help that teachers in our school actually said, oh, wait, you find this hard in sixth grade? You find this hard? Oh, just wait till you get to ninth grade. Just see what you have to learn then. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm failing right now. What am I going to do then? I'm going to really fail out really hard, So it was frightening. And so what? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now you think you're bad at something, and now you're getting get worse at it. Same way in the ranking system you mentioned, you get a bad rank right from first grade, and you start to believe that you are not a good person, or you're not smart. And because you are who you believe, this starts to fulfill its own prophecy, and you never get better. So the ranking system is quite demotivating to anybody who's not in the top rank system, right? And nobody, everybody can't be in the top.
Yeah. We were talking about how we all put too much focus on planning for the future instead of letting them enjoy the present. And that was totally the case even in the 90s. I mean, right from first grade, everything was geared towards making sure that, at some point you can make a living. It didn't matter what you did from first grade until 10th grade, your formative years of your life. It didn't matter what you did. All that was you're preparing for a future. What future? I don't know, but some future. Okay, with every story, there is some exceptions. I sort of beat up on our education a little bit, but there are some exceptions. Like, for example, in 10th grade, we had this geography teacher called Dinaka Wilson. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the guy, right? If I remember one thing from subjects we learned in school is geography, because he was the head of the NCC, the National Cadet Corps, sort of the head of the scouts. And he was a practical guy, because he used to take these scouts out camping, teach them how to survive in the wild and teach them how to read maps and use a compass and things like that. So when he taught geography, he was very practical, like in the sense that he gave us an appreciation of how topographical maps are drawn. I remember that, when I would go out with family to some sort of a hiking spot, when I see the hills, the whole topographical map kind of a picture comes, I sort of start appreciating these things around me. There is a diamond in the rough.
So what he gave you was context to your learning.
Yeah.
And that is what sealed the learning for you in your mind, right? For me, it is in seventh grade, it was a physics teacher called Mr. Fernandez, who was known to be a very strict teacher, but he actually changed my life in sciences. And I can attribute all my work that I do, that I'm in technical work today, that I'm in science and engineering, is all attributed to him because he did a really good job of explaining physics in seventh grade. And I remember that the only thing I studied was physics, and I got really good scores in physics, not so much in everything else, especially Hindi, but I did read a lot of physics.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was awesome. And I also remember in 10th grade we had this computer teacher called Mr. Chanakeshava. That's his name, right?
Yeah. That was his name. Yeah.
He was so good at it. He used to give us these little puzzles that you had to solve, and he asked us to write a program for finding out prime numbers, and it was called the sieve of Eratosthenes.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to write that algorithm in what language I can't remember now. Basic. I think it was basic.
Okay.
To find the prime numbers, and that was life changing. I'm like, this process, the sieve of Eratosthenes, gives you all these prime numbers. That was like life changing moment. So
Amazing.
that's where a lot of things are made, and all our careers are based on kind of random decisions. Like, why did we decide to do what we do, right? It's kind of random. Like, you just decide that I like this, I'll do it, and then it's a path you can never change. Somewhere in seventh, eighth grade or something, you decide that you either like the sciences or you don't, you like the humanities, and you roll with that for the rest of your life.
Well, I mean, so the thing is that our experience through the 90s, right? I've sort of passed a very harsh verdict on our education.
This was based on 30 years ago. I don't know how things are now, but we'll figure that out later.
Yeah. So our discussion would be incomplete if we don't analyze, why was it that way, right? Why did society decide to teach kids, or why did all this happen? And I have one theory. Okay. So here's my theory. Now, the kind of rote learning by memorization or rote learning, the kind of education that we had in the 90s, it's not specific to India, right? If you actually look at it, this problem plagued most of the developing countries. Now, this was the problem in any country in Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, Brazil, any developing country. And back then, I remember, I mean, if you look at the West, if you look at Europe and America, they had a very practical form of education starting from elementary school. And that's why a lot of research labs, a lot of smart kids and entrepreneurs came out of US, because kids were taught in a practical way right from elementary school. Now, the problem in a developing country is that India opened up its economic borders only in the early to mid 90s, right? Until then, it was a very tough place to live. And most of society, including our parents, essentially were lower middle class. And what lower middle class means is that you're essentially trying to make ends meet. You're living paycheck to paycheck, and parents are generally under stress because you don't have any safety net. It's not like our grandparents had much to leave behind for like our parents, right? I mean, so there was never a safety net. So my dad got his education. When he started working, he had like 0 rupees in his bank account. There's a lot of pressure that if my parents lost their job, then they immediately would not be able to meet the requirements of the family. And amidst all this, because parents want their kids to do better than they did, they want a better future for their kids, they would stretch themselves thin and send them to private schools. Like my brother and I, we were sent to private schools, which back then was an expensive place to send your kid. But my parents decided to stretch themselves thin because they felt that, hey, this is what we need to do in order to ensure that our kids have a bright future. So when you're in this high stress environment as a parent, you're looking for any signals of success. In case of the children, the signal of success is doing well in the test and making sure you have a top 5 or a top 10 rank, or making sure that you're constantly improving your rank as you go from first grade to 10th grade. Because of this high stress environment, you're looking at life with a very strict and narrow lens. If you got, say, like the 5th rank in your 3rd grade, and then you drop down to 9th rank in the 4th grade, you take that as a big failure. because like the only signal of success you have for the whole year is how did my kid improve or not. And the minute you see your kid fail, and then you're like, oh my god, man, this is very bad, because I need to do something, because I need to stress this upon my kid, because if he continues this trend, then he's not going to have a safety net. And even your parents also know that they can't really leave much behind for you.
And to think about it from your parents' point of view, they are already stretching themselves thin. They're paying beyond their means already to send you to this good school, and they want to see some output out of it to justify their decision to send you to this school. And when you don't meet that, it is stressful for them, because they now imagine that you will also end up with a lack of a safety net, or suffer in the way they did to get to where they are today. And they obviously want better for you. So that's where it comes from, right?
That's where it comes from. Yeah. And I think my hypothesis is correct. The reason I think it is correct is because I was speaking to my friends who now live in Bangalore, who have kids who are in like 5th and 6th grade and so on. And I was asking them, hey, what do you think about the education that your kids have right now compared to what we did? Right. And she was telling me that the opportunities in education are incredible now. It's not like the way it used to be. I mean, in fact, the schools that we went to in the 90s were considered the cream of the crop, right? These were Catholic private schools established by the British in the 1800s. For your 11th and 12th, the school that you went to, Bishop Gordon's, it was called the Eton of the East.
Yeah, the Eton of the East.
These were very prestigious schools. And she was telling me that a lot of parents don't want to send the kids to those schools anymore, because they haven't really changed that much from back then. I mean, they sort of still they haven't evolved from what they were. And instead, you have a ton of schools, right, with different philosophies. So if you want your kid to focus on STEM education, then there are schools, private schools for that. And if you want your kid to be more focused on outdoors and arts, then there are schools to cater for those kind of parents as well. Of course, these schools are expensive. They are still out of reach for most people. But I'm happy to see this kind of an education change. And they have at least 2 periods per day, which is 2 hours per day, essentially, which is focused on outdoor play and crafts and arts and music and things like that. And if you compare that to what we had, that's 2 hours per day, right? And when we were growing up, right from first grade, we had 1 class per week.
We had 1 hour a week of sport, 1 hour a week of music.
That's it. Right? Instead, now these children have like 2 hours per day, which is great. Everything is project based. There is no rote education by memorization at all. There is no rank based system. The brutal rank based system is not there. Like, the kids just get some sort of a grade, like an A or a A plus or whatever it is. So, it's not like, it's not no longer like the rank based system. And it seems very hopeful. It seems like her children are really enjoying going to school and learning new things and creating new things with their own hands.
That's awesome.
These kind of schools are still expensive. Public schools and the cheaper private schools still are not there yet, but I'm hoping that it'll all bubble down and it'll become the norm in the future.
That's nice. Now, actually going like fast forward immediately 30 years, right? Coming to today's world, after this whole COVID debacle that the whole planet Earth has faced, I know all these parents are trying to get their kids into these great colleges and universities, but so much of the education last year happened online. Mm-hmm. And it got me thinking, like, really, what is the need in today's world to go into a college for in-person education? And that the more I thought about it, I realized that there are some professions that you can do online education just as well as going in person. Like, think about computer programming or some amount of hardware that can probably be taught online for the most part. And also, a lot of these companies now really are not looking for a generic university education, because they know exactly what kind of people they are looking for and the kind of skill sets they are looking for. So they much rather that the candidates have those courses under their belt, even if it's like an online course from Udemy. And that gives a lot more value to these companies. Contrast that with somebody who's a doctor. You don't want a doctor who got an online degree in medicine.
Yeah.
You want this doctor to have gone in and If it's a surgeon, you want the surgeon to have operated on cadavers and got experience and done a residency in a hospital. And there's a place for in-school education. But I think a lot of it has now changed in given of what we can do in the new age in terms of technology and stuff like that. So what do you think? Are these parents nowadays putting too much emphasis on going to these colleges?
Yeah, I thought about this a little bit. A lot of my colleagues at work, their children are now in undergrad, right? They're doing their undergrad education in these US universities. And I asked them, how much is the fees and like how much does it cost you to send two kids to college? And it is already very expensive.
And it's getting more expensive every year, right? Because rise of college costs has far outpaced inflation in the US.
Or salaries, yeah.
Or salaries.
If you can't afford to pay for your kids' graduate studies, then you have to make them take a loan. They come out at 21 and 22 with huge loans tied to the back. And the outlook also is very bad, right? In the sense that by the time our kids are in college, like 10, 15 years later, if the same trend continues, it's going to be incredibly expensive. It's going to be like $100,000, $120,000 per year. For a 4-year program, you're talking about like $500,000, which is just for one kid.
Yeah.
Two kids, like $1 million to get. And for what? I mean, it's pretty crazy. So I have a feeling that since we do live in a capitalistic society, I think the market will speak for itself. If these colleges keep increasing their tuition like this, once your kid is out of high school, the companies are already saying that, look, we don't necessarily need you to do a traditional 4-year degree. As long as you have these skills and you're able to show adequate proficiency in all these skills that the companies want, they'll happily take you. And you're already ahead of someone who's graduated from, say, University of Southern California or Harvard or Yale, because you don't have like a $500,000 loan tagged to your back.
And on top of that, a lot of these companies put out these challenges and they want to see who does well in those challenges because they are already in line with what the company wants, as opposed to somebody with a traditional college education coming out with a lot more theoretical knowledge than applied problem solving in, the coding world.
Yeah. So I have a feeling that, certain disciplines like medicine, maybe law, those kind of stuff probably are still, Harvard law is still going to be popular. It's going to be like a very prestigious institution and so on. It's going to cost you a ton of money to send your kid there. But I think that certain disciplines, have already proven to not require a traditional education. This is computer engineering, things like even marketing, like MBA and things like that, which are so expensive.
Yeah.
Getting real life on the job training for sales and marketing and things like that is much more valuable than paying like a ton of money and going for a 4 or 5 year course.
Yep.
That's what I think.
It's a good discussion on education. Do we call it a wrap?
Yeah, let's call it on that.
Okay, cool. Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening. You can find transcripts and show notes at www.halflife.show.
We'd love for you to leave us a review on your favorite podcast app and also write to us on Twitter @HalfLifeShow.